The midday heat was merciless across the New Mexico territory, as Tobias Randall guided his bay mare through the rocky canyon near Julian, his canteen nearly empty, and his patience wearing thin with every scorching breath of wind that offered no relief. He had been riding for 3 days straight, trailing a herd of stolen cattle that belonged to his employer, the Double R Ranch outside of Silver City. The tracks had gone cold somewhere near this desolate stretch of red rock and dried mesquite, and Tobias was beginning to think the rustlers had outsmarted him. At 26 years old, he had been working cattle since he was 14, and his pride would not let him return empty-handed. The year was 1878, and in this harsh land, a man's reputation meant everything. As he rounded a particularly large boulder, his mare suddenly sidestepped, ears flicking forward with interest. Tobias pulled the reins gently, scanning the area with eyes trained to notice anything out of place. That was when he saw her, pressed against the shaded side of a massive rock formation, her body curled into the smallest possible space where the shadow offered protection from the brutal sun. She was wearing a dress that might have once been fine, though now it was torn and dusty, the pale blue fabric darkened with sweat and dirt. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and even from this distance, Tobias could see she was trembling despite the heat. When their eyes met, she flinched, pressing herself harder against the rock as if she could disappear into it. Tobias dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He had seen plenty of strange things in his years riding these lands, but a woman alone in this God-forsaken stretch of territory was not something he encountered every day. "Easy now," he called out, his voice rough from days of sparse conversation with only his horse. "I am not going to hurt you." The woman shook her head frantically, and he could see tears streaming down her face, cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "Please," she whispered, though her voice carried in the stillness of the canyon. "Please just go. Pretend you did not see me." Tobias stopped walking, standing about 20 feet from her position. "Miss, I cannot do that. You will die out here without water or shelter. That sun will cook you alive once it shifts and you lose that shade." "I would rather die than be seen," she said, and there was such desperate conviction in her voice that Tobias felt something tighten in his chest. "You do not understand. If he finds me, if anyone tells him where I am as good as dead anyway." The way she said it made Tobias's jaw clench. He had 3 sisters back in Texas, and the thought of any of them in such terror made his blood run cold. "Who is looking for you?" she hesitated, her dark eyes searching his face as if trying to determine whether she could trust him. Finally, she whispered, "My husband, Richard Wallace. He is a powerful man in Silver City. He has men everywhere searching for me." Tobias knew the name. Richard Wallace owned the biggest saloon in Silver City and had his fingers in half the businesses in town. He was also known to have a mean streak and connections to some unsavory characters. The kind of man who always got what he wanted one way or another. "What did he do to you?" Tobias asked quietly. The woman's face crumpled and she looked away. "What did he not do? I have been his wife for 2 years and every day was worse than the last. The bruises, the threats, the way he would lock me in our room for days if I displeased him. 3 weeks ago he told me he was going to kill me, not in anger, not in the heat of an argument. He said it calmly over breakfast like he was discussing the weather. He said I had embarrassed him in front of his associates one too many times, and he was done with me." Tobias felt rage building in his gut. He had never understood men who raised their hands to women, who used their strength to terrorize instead of protect. "So you ran." "I waited until he was drunk and asleep. I took nothing but the clothes on my back. I have been hiding, moving at night, staying out of sight. but 3 days ago I saw some of his men in a town east of here. I ran into the desert, and I have been trying to stay hidden ever since. I know he will not stop looking. He has too much pride to let me go. Come with me, Tobias said, making a decision that would change both their lives. I have water and supplies. We can get you somewhere safe. There is nowhere safe, she said, defeat heavy in her voice. Not in this territory. He knows everyone. He owns everyone. Then we will go somewhere he does not own anyone, Tobias replied. But first, you need to drink water, and we need to get you out of this canyon before you collapse. When did you last eat? The woman swayed slightly, and Tobias realized she was probably half delirious from dehydration and exposure. He approached slowly, pulling his canteen from his saddle. My name is Tobias Randall. I work for the Double R Ranch. I give you my word that I will not let anyone hurt you. She stared at him for a long moment, then slowly reached out and took the canteen with shaking hands. Theresa, she whispered. My name is Theresa. Tobias watched as she drank deeply, having to force himself not to tell her to slow down, knowing she needed the water desperately. When she finally lowered the canteen, some color had returned to her face. She was beautiful, he realized, with fine features and intelligent dark eyes that probably sparkled when not haunted by fear. Can you ride? He asked. I have not ridden since I was a girl, but I will manage, Theresa said, attempting to stand. Her legs buckled immediately, and Tobias caught her before she hit the ground. She weighed almost nothing, and he could feel her ribs through the thin fabric of her dress. When did you last eat? He asked again, more urgently this time. I do not remember, she admitted. 2 days, maybe 3. I found some berries yesterday, but I was not sure if they were safe to eat, so I only had a few. Tobias helped her to his horse and lifted her into the saddle with ease, despite her weak protests about being able to manage herself. He swung up behind her, one arm around her waist to keep her steady as she sagged against him, her body finally giving in to exhaustion now that someone else was there to shoulder the burden of survival. They rode for an hour, Tobias constantly scanning the horizon for any sign of riders. He knew a place, an abandoned line shack about 5 miles north, where they could hole up for the night and figure out their next move. Theresa drifted in and out of consciousness, her head resting against his chest, and Tobias found himself adjusting his grip to make sure she did not fall. The line shack was exactly as he remembered, a small wooden structure that had once housed ranch hands during cattle drives, but had been abandoned for years. It was not much, just 4 walls and a roof, but it would provide shelter and a place for Theresa to rest while he figured out what to do next. He carried her inside, laying her gently on his bedroll, which he spread out in the corner. She stirred but did not wake as he set about building a small fire and preparing a simple meal of beans and jerky softened in water. It was not much, but it would give her some strength. When the food was ready, he gently shook her awake. Theresa's eyes flew open, panic immediate, but then she saw his face and seemed to remember where she was. Easy, he said softly. You need to eat something. She managed half the bowl before her stomach rebelled, unused to food after days of near starvation. Tobias did not push her, setting the rest aside for later. You can sleep now, I will keep watch. You should sleep too, Theresa said, her voice barely above a whisper. You look exhausted. I will rest when I know we are safe, Tobias replied. He positioned himself near the door, his rifle across his lap, and watched as Theresa's eyes drifted closed once more. The night passed slowly. Tobias dozed intermittently, jerking awake at every sound, but nothing materialized beyond the usual nocturnal animals and the wind howling through the canyon. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, He finally allowed himself to relax slightly. Theresa woke with the sun, and Tobias watched as she sat up slowly, testing her body's limits. She looked better after the rest, though still frighteningly thin and bearing the marks of her ordeal. There was a bruise on her left cheek that he had not noticed in the dimmer light of the canyon, and another on her wrist in the distinct shape of fingers. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like I might survive," she said, attempting a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Thank you, Tobias, for not leaving me there, for not turning me over to Richard." "I would never do that," he said firmly. "No woman deserves what you have been through." Theresa looked at him curiously, as if trying to figure him out. "Why are you helping me? You do not know me. You have no reason to put yourself at risk for a stranger." Tobias considered the question. "I have 3 sisters back in Texas," he said finally. "The oldest, Mary, she got married to a man who seemed decent enough at first, but after the wedding he changed. Started drinking more, became mean. She was trapped, because once a woman marries, she has no rights, no way out. My father and brothers had to step in, and even then, it took everything we had to get her free. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help a woman in trouble, I would not turn away." "What happened to your sister?" Theresa asked softly. "She is doing well now. Remarried a few years later to a good man who treats her like she hung the moon. They have 2 children and a farm outside of Austin. But it took her a long time to stop flinching at sudden movements, to believe that not all men would hurt her." Theresa was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "I am afraid I will never stop being afraid," she admitted. "Even now, sitting here with you being nothing but kind, part of me is waiting for you to change, to show your true colors." "I understand," Tobias said. "And I cannot promise that the fear will go away quickly. But I can promise that I will not hurt you, and I will do everything in my power to make sure Wallace never gets his hands on you again." They spent the day resting and planning. Tobias knew they could not stay at the line shack for long. Eventually, someone would come looking, whether it was Wallace's men or ranch hands from one of the local spreads. They needed to move, but Theresa needed more time to regain her strength. He used the time to learn more about her. Theresa Wallace, née Weston, had been born and raised in Santa Fe, the daughter of a merchant who had died when she was 17. Her mother had passed years earlier, leaving Theresa alone with a small inheritance. Richard Wallace had been charming at first, attentive and generous. He was 15 years her senior, but that had not seemed unusual. He had courted her properly, winning over her father's business partners and the few relatives she had left. "I thought I was lucky," Theresa said bitterly as they sat outside the shack in the shade, the day too hot to remain inside. "A wealthy man wanting to marry me when I had so little to offer. I did not see the signs until it was too late. The way he would grip my arm too tightly when he thought I was paying attention to other men. The way he would make decisions for me, dismissing my opinions as if I were a child. The way he isolated me from what few friends I had. It was not your fault," Tobias said. "Men like that, they are good at hiding their true nature until they have you trapped. Sometimes I wonder if there were signs I missed because I was so desperate not to be alone," Theresa said. "My father's business partners were circling, trying to take advantage of my situation. Richard seemed like a safe harbor in a storm. I just did not realize I was jumping from a ship into shark-infested waters." Tobias felt a growing respect for this woman who had survived 2 years of hell and still had the courage to run, knowing she might die in the attempt. There was steel beneath her fear, a core of strength that Wallace had tried but failed to break. Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Tobias would hunt small game or ride to a nearby stream for water, always careful to cover their tracks and watch for any signs of pursuit. Theresa slowly regained her strength. her appetite returning as her body recovered from the ordeal of her flight through the desert. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their lives. Tobias told her about growing up in Texas, the youngest of 5 children, learning to ride before he could walk. He spoke of coming to New Mexico 3 years ago, looking for work and adventure, finding both in equal measure. He told her about the cattle he had been tracking, admitting that the trail had gone completely cold and he would have to return to the ranch soon with nothing to show for his efforts. "What will happen when you go back?" Theresa asked. They were sitting outside as the sun set, the temperature finally dropping to something bearable. "I will probably lose my job," Tobias admitted. "The foreman was already skeptical about sending me out alone. This will confirm his opinion that I am not up to the task." "Then do not go back," Theresa said impulsively. "Come with me, wherever I end up going." Tobias looked at her, surprised by the surge of hope he felt at her words. Over the past few days, he had grown accustomed to her presence, to the sound of her voice and the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. He found himself wanting to protect her, to see her smile, to be the one who helped her learn to trust again. "Where will you go?" he asked carefully. "I do not know," Theresa admitted. "Somewhere far from here, California maybe, or north to Colorado, somewhere Richard's reach does not extend." "That is a lot of country to cover," Tobias said. "It would be easier with someone who knows the land." "Are you offering to be my guide, Tobias Randall?" Theresa asked, and for the first time since he had found her, there was a hint of teasing in her voice. "I might be offering more than that," Tobias said, the words out before he could second-guess himself. "I might be offering to see this through to the end, wherever that end might be." Theresa's smile faded, replaced by something more serious. "You barely know me. I could be lying about everything. I could bring nothing but trouble down on your head." "You could," Tobias agreed. "But I do not think you are. And as for trouble, well, I have never been one to shy away from it." That night, as they sat by the small fire, Theresa told him more about her life with Wallace. The way he would fly into rages over the smallest things, how he would apologize afterward with gifts and promises that it would never happen again. How those promises were always broken. How the violence escalated until she lived in constant fear, never knowing what would set him off. "He broke my arm once," she said quietly, staring into the flames. "Told everyone I had fallen down the stairs. The doctor knew I could see it in his eyes, but he said nothing. No one ever said anything. I was completely alone." Tobias reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. She tensed for a moment, then relaxed, her fingers curling around his. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just holding on to each other in the darkness. The next morning, Tobias made a decision. They needed supplies if they were going to make it to California, and that meant going into town. It was a risk, but a calculated one. He would go to Julian, a small mining town about 15 miles south, while Theresa stayed hidden at the line shack. He hated leaving her, but there was no choice. "What if you do not come back?" Theresa asked, fear evident in her voice. "I will come back," Tobias promised. "I will leave you my rifle and my horse. If I am not back in 2 days, ride north. Do not stop until you reach Colorado. Find a town called Durango and ask for a man named Samuel Roth. He is an old friend of my father's. Tell him I sent you and he will help you. Tobias, I cannot take your horse and leave you stranded." "You can and you will if it comes to that," Tobias said firmly. "Your life is more important than my convenience. Promise me." Theresa hesitated, then nodded. "I promise." Tobias set out on foot as the sun rose, making good time across the rough terrain. Julian was a ramshackle collection of buildings clinging to the side of a mountain, built around a silver mine that had played out years ago. The people who remained were the stubborn ones, the ones who refused to admit defeat and move on. It was exactly the kind of place where a man could buy supplies without too many questions asked. He kept his head down as he entered the general store, quickly gathering what they would need for the journey west. Dried beef, flour, beans, coffee, and ammunition for his rifle. The storekeeper was an old Chinese man who asked no questions and seemed content to take Tobias's money without making conversation. As Tobias was leaving, he heard voices raised in anger outside. He paused in the doorway, instinct telling him to wait. Through the dusty window, he could see 3 men on horseback, rough-looking types with tied-down guns, and the kind of eyes that suggested they made their living in ways that kept them just ahead of the law. "We are looking for a woman," one of them was saying to a miner who had been unfortunate enough to be in their path. "Dark hair, early 20s, might be traveling alone or with someone. There is a reward for information." Tobias felt his blood run cold. Wallace's men had expanded their search. He waited until they rode on, then slipped out of the store and made his way quickly back toward the line shack, his mind racing. They could not stay here any longer. They needed to move tonight, under cover of darkness. He made it back to the line shack by mid-afternoon, relieved to find Theresa safe and unharmed. "We need to leave," he said without preamble. "Wallace has men in Julian asking questions." Theresa went pale but nodded. "I will get ready." They waited until nightfall, then set out heading west. Tobias knew the land well enough to navigate by starlight, keeping to the rough country where they were less likely to encounter other travelers. Theresa rode behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist, trusting him to guide them safely through the darkness. They traveled like that for 3 nights, holing up during the day in whatever shelter they could find and moving under cover of darkness. It was exhausting, nerve-wracking work, but slowly they put distance between themselves and Silver City. On the 4th day, they crossed into Arizona territory, and Tobias allowed himself to believe they might actually make it. They had stopped to rest near a small creek, the horses drinking their fill while Tobias and Theresa sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree. Theresa had said little during the journey, her energy focused on simply enduring, but now she turned to him with a question in her eyes. "What happens when we reach California?" she asked. "I have no money, no family, no way to support myself. I cannot expect you to take care of me forever." "You do not have to worry about that yet," Tobias said. "But I do worry," Theresa insisted. "You have given up your job, your life to help me. What kind of future can we have running like this? The kind where you are alive and free," Tobias said. "Everything else we will figure out as we go." Theresa looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, "I think I'm falling in love with you, Tobias Randall, and that terrifies me almost as much as Richard does." Tobias felt his heart skip a beat. He had been trying not to acknowledge his own growing feelings, telling himself he was just helping someone in need, that the protective instinct he felt was natural and nothing more. But the truth was, he had been falling for her too, slowly and surely, with every conversation, every shared moment of fear and hope. "Why does it terrify you?" he asked gently. "Because I do not trust my own judgment," Theresa said, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought I loved Richard once. I was so wrong about him. What if I am wrong about you too? What if this is just gratitude or desperation, or some kind of broken thing inside me looking for someone to save me?" Tobias reached out and cupped her face gently, wiping away a tear with his thumb. "You are not broken," he said firmly. "You are strong and brave, and you saved yourself when you ran. I just happened to come along at the right time. As for the rest, we have time to figure it out. There is no rush. We will just keep moving forward, and whatever this is between us, we will let it unfold naturally." And if it turns out to be real, Theresa asked. Then I will consider myself the luckiest man alive, Tobias said. But there is no pressure, Theresa, none at all. Whether you end up loving me or just seeing me as a friend who helped you in a bad situation, I will still make sure you get somewhere safe. Theresa leaned forward and kissed him, soft and tentative, a question and an answer all at once. Tobias responded carefully, keeping the kiss gentle, letting her set the pace and the boundaries. When she pulled back, there was wonder in her eyes. That was nothing like kissing Richard, she whispered. That was beautiful. They continued their journey west, but something had shifted between them. The touches became more frequent, more natural. Holding hands as they walked, sitting close by the fire at night, the casual intimacy of two people learning to trust each other. Tobias was patient, never pushing for more than Theresa was ready to give, and gradually he saw her fear begin to ease, replaced by something that looked like hope. They reached Tucson 3 weeks after leaving Julian, and Tobias made a decision. They were far enough from Silver City now that the risk was reduced, and Theresa needed proper rest and food. He used what money he had left to rent a room in a small boarding house on the edge of town, registering them as husband and wife to avoid questions. The landlady, a plump Mexican woman named Rosa, took one look at Theresa's thin frame and exhausted face and immediately began fussing over her, bringing extra food and drawing hot baths. Tobias was grateful for the motherly attention, knowing Theresa needed kindness from another woman. That night, as they lay in the actual bed the boarding house provided, separated by a careful distance and a line of pillows, Theresa spoke into the darkness. I never thought I would feel safe again, but I do when I am with you. You are safe, Tobias assured her. And you always will be, as long as I have breath in my body. That is what I mean, Theresa said. I believe you. Despite everything Richard did to me, despite all the reasons I should never trust a man again, I believe you. You have never given me a reason not to. They stayed in Tucson for a week, Tobias finding work at a local stable while Theresa rested and recovered. The food and the rest did wonders for her, color returning to her cheeks, her eyes losing some of their haunted quality. She began to smile more, to laugh at Tobias's stories and jokes, to seem like the woman she might have been before Wallace broke her spirit. On their last night in Tucson, as they sat on the small porch of the boarding house watching the sun set, Theresa said, I do not want to go to California. Tobias looked at her in surprise. Why not? Because I have been thinking, Theresa said carefully. Running to California, it feels like we are just postponing the inevitable. Richard will never stop looking for me. He will spend every dollar he has, call in every favor until he finds me or confirms I am dead. As long as I am just running, I am still his prisoner. I am still letting him control my life. What are you suggesting? Tobias asked. I want to fight back, Theresa said, steel in her voice. I want to make sure he can never come after me legally. I want to divorce him. Tobias whistled low. Divorce was nearly impossible for a woman to obtain, especially when the husband was wealthy and connected. That will be dangerous, he said. You would have to go back to New Mexico territory to file the papers. You would have to face him in court. I know, Theresa said. But I have been thinking about what you said about me saving myself. That is what I need to do. Really do it, not just run away, but actually free myself. And I need witnesses, people who will testify to what he did to me. Rosa mentioned that there is a lawyer in Santa Fe who helps women in situations like mine. A man named Charles Robertson who does not care about making enemies of powerful men. It could work, Tobias said slowly. But it will be risky. Wallace will fight it with everything he has, and if things go badly, if he gets to you before the law can protect you. I would rather die trying to be free than live the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, Theresa said, but I cannot do it alone. I need someone with me, someone who will stand beside me and testify to my condition when you found me, someone who will not be intimidated by Richard's threats. I will do it, Tobias said without hesitation. Whatever you need, I am with you. Theresa turned to him, taking his hands in hers. Why? She asked. Why are you willing to risk so much for me? Tobias looked into her eyes, seeing the woman who had survived hell and was now ready to fight back, and he knew the answer. Because I love you, Theresa Wallace. I think I started loving you from the moment you told me you would rather die than be seen. And I realized how much courage it takes to keep going when you are that afraid. Because you deserve to be free, to have a life that is yours and not defined by the man who hurt you. And because I want to be part of that life if you will have me. Theresa was crying now, but they were not tears of fear or pain. I love you too, she whispered. I fought against it, tried to tell myself it was too soon, that I was too damaged, but I love you, Tobias. I love your kindness and your strength, and the way you have never once tried to control me or tell me what I should do. You have given me choices, and that is the most precious gift anyone has ever given me. They kissed then, deeper and more passionate than before, years of loneliness and fear melting away in the warmth of finding someone who truly saw them, truly cared. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Theresa rested her forehead against his. Will you marry me? She asked. After the divorce is final, after I am truly free, will you marry me for real? Yes, Tobias said, joy flooding through him. 1,000 times yes. They left Tucson the next morning, heading east instead of west, towards Santa Fe and the confrontation that awaited them. Tobias spent the journey planning, thinking through every possible scenario. They would need to move carefully, building their case before alerting Wallace to their presence. They would need witnesses, documentation, a strategy. Santa Fe was bustling when they arrived, the territorial capital full of politicians and businessmen, lawyers and landowners. It was also, thankfully, far enough from Silver City that Wallace's influence was diminished. Tobias and Theresa found the office of Charles Robertson, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a reputation for taking on cases no one else would touch. Robertson listened to Theresa's story without interruption, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. When she finished, he sat back in his chair and studied them both. Your husband is a dangerous man, he said bluntly. If we proceed with this, he will retaliate in every way he can. He will attack your character, claim you are insane or unfaithful. He will threaten witnesses, bribe judges, and do everything in his considerable power to destroy you. I know, Theresa said, but I have to try. Robertson nodded slowly. I have handled 3 divorce cases for abused women. 2 succeeded, 1 failed spectacularly. The woman who failed ended up having to flee the territory entirely. But in all 3 cases, the key was documentation and witnesses. Do you have any proof of the abuse? Medical records, witnesses who saw the injuries, anything? The doctor in Silver City who treated my broken arm, Theresa said. He knew what really happened. And Richard's housekeeper, Maria Sanchez, she saw everything. She tried to help me when she could, snuck me extra food when Richard locked me in my room. She might be willing to testify if she could be protected from retaliation. What about you? Robertson asked, turning to Tobias. What is your relationship to Mrs. Wallace? I found her in the desert, fleeing for her life, Tobias said. I can testify to her condition when I found her, the fear and the injuries. And I can testify that we have been traveling together for weeks now, properly and respectfully, so there can be no question of adultery. Robertson tapped his fingers on his desk, thinking. It is not much, but it might be enough. New Mexico territory has laws protecting women from cruelty, though they are rarely enforced. If we can prove a pattern of violence and your reasonable fear for your life, we might convince a judge to grant the divorce. But we need that doctor and that housekeeper. Over the next 2 weeks, Robertson worked tirelessly on their behalf. He sent discreet inquiries to Silver City, gathering information and carefully reaching out to potential witnesses. The doctor, it turned out, had kept detailed records of Theresa's injuries, documenting them in a way that suggested he had always known the truth. He was willing to testify, having been troubled by his inability to help at the time. The housekeeper was more difficult. Maria Sanchez was terrified of Wallace, having worked for him for 5 years, and seen the full extent of his cruelty. But when Robertson explained that Theresa was seeking a divorce and needed her testimony, Maria agreed to come to Santa Fe, on the condition that she could stay in protective custody until after the trial. Wallace, meanwhile, had learned of Theresa's presence in Santa Fe. He arrived with a lawyer of his own, a slick man named Bradford, who immediately began spreading rumors about Theresa's mental state and her supposed infidelity with Tobias. The territorial newspapers picked up the story, turning it into a scandal that had everyone talking. Tobias stood by Theresa through it all, his presence a steady anchor as the storm swirled around them. He accompanied her to Robertson's office for strategy sessions, held her when she broke down in tears from the stress, and made sure she ate and slept, even when the anxiety made her want to do neither. The night before the hearing, as they sat in their rented room, Theresa said quietly, "If we lose tomorrow, if the judge sides with Richard, I will not go back. I will run again, and I will never stop running." "Then I will run with you," Tobias said, "but I do not think we are going to lose. I have watched you these past weeks, the way you have faced this fight with courage and determination. You are not the same terrified woman I found in that canyon. You are stronger now, and that strength will show tomorrow." The courtroom was packed when they arrived. Divorce cases were rare enough to be notable, and one involving a wealthy businessman and allegations of cruelty was practically a public spectacle. Tobias felt rage at the gawkers who had come to watch Theresa's pain laid bare, but he kept his face neutral, focusing on supporting her. Judge Daniel Morrison was a stern-faced man known for his fair judgments and his unwillingness to be influenced by wealth or status. He called the hearing to order and listened as Robertson laid out Theresa's case, detailing the pattern of abuse, the escalating violence, and her reasonable fear for her life. The doctor testified first, describing the injuries he had treated over 2 years, including the broken arm that Theresa had claimed was from a fall, but which showed clear signs of being caused by someone grabbing and twisting violently. Maria Sanchez testified next, her voice shaking but firm as she described the locked doors, the bruises, the times she had heard Richard screaming at Theresa, and the crashes that followed. Tobias testified about finding Theresa in the desert, describing her condition, her terror, and the way she had been willing to die rather than return to her husband. He spoke about the nights she woke up screaming from nightmares, the way she flinched at sudden movements, the slow process of her learning to trust again. Wallace's lawyer tried to discredit them all, suggesting the doctor had been paid off, that Maria was a disgruntled employee, that Tobias was Theresa's lover, and they had concocted the whole story to justify their adultery. But under Robertson's careful questioning, the truth shone through. The evidence was too consistent, too detailed, too heartbreaking to be anything but real. Wallace himself took the stand, playing the part of the wounded husband, the misunderstood man whose wife had abandoned him. but his performance was too polished, too rehearsed. When Robertson began cross-examining him, asking detailed questions about specific incidents Theresa had described, Wallace's temper began to show. His face reddened, his voice rose, and for just a moment, everyone in the courtroom saw the man behind the mask. "Is it not true, Mr. Wallace, that you told your wife you were going to kill her?" Robertson asked calmly. "She was hysterical," Wallace snapped. "She misunderstood a comment made in frustration. And the broken arm, was that also a misunderstanding?" She fell. "I was not even present when it happened. Yet Maria Sanchez testified that she heard you screaming at your wife immediately before hearing a crash and your wife's cries of pain." "Maria is a liar," Wallace said, his composure cracking further. "She is probably sleeping with Randall too, for all I know. This whole thing is a conspiracy to steal my wife and my money." The judge's expression hardened. "Mr. Wallace, you will control yourself in my courtroom, or I will hold you in contempt." The hearing lasted 2 days. By the end, Tobias could see the toll it was taking on Theresa, the strain of reliving her trauma in front of dozens of strangers. But she held firm, her testimony clear and unwavering when Robertson finally called her to the stand. She described her marriage in painful detail, the courtship that had seemed like a fairy tale, the gradual shift after the wedding, the first time Richard had hit her. She talked about the isolation, the fear, the way she had started to believe she deserved it, that she was as worthless as he said. And she talked about the moment she knew she had to run, when he told her calmly that he was going to kill her, and she had seen in his eyes that he meant it. "Why should I grant this divorce?" Judge Morrison asked when all the testimony had been given. "Marriage is a sacred bond, not to be dissolved lightly." "Because I have a right to live," Theresa said, her voice strong. "Because no bond is sacred when it is used to imprison and harm. Because if I go back to that man, I will not survive, and I deserve the chance to have a life. A real life, free from fear." The judge took 2 days to deliberate. They were the longest 2 days of Tobias's life. He and Theresa stayed in their room, neither able to eat much or sleep well, just waiting for the decision that would determine their future. When the summons came to return to court, they dressed in their best clothes and walked to the courthouse hand in hand. The courtroom was packed again, everyone eager to hear the verdict. Judge Morrison entered, his expression unreadable, and called the court to order. "I have considered all the evidence presented in this case," he began. "The testimony of the doctor, the housekeeper, and Mr. Randall, as well as Mrs. Wallace's own testimony. I have also observed Mr. Wallace's demeanor both in and out of this courtroom, and I have reviewed the territorial laws regarding grounds for divorce." He paused, and Tobias felt Theresa's hand tighten on his. "It is the finding of this court that Mrs. Theresa Wallace has been subjected to extreme cruelty by her husband, Richard Wallace, and that she has reasonable cause to fear for her life should she be forced to return to the marriage. Therefore, I am granting the petition for divorce. The marriage between Richard Wallace and Theresa Wallace is hereby dissolved. Mrs. Wallace is awarded no alimony and seeks none, and both parties are ordered to have no further contact with each other. Should Mr. Wallace attempt to contact, threaten, or harm his former wife, he will face criminal charges." The courtroom erupted in noise, some people cheering, others gasping in shock. Theresa burst into tears, collapsing against Tobias, who held her tightly as relief flooded through him. They had won. She was free. Wallace stormed out of the courtroom, his face purple with rage, but there was nothing he could do. The law had spoken, and even his money and influence could not overturn a judge's decision. Outside the courthouse, Robertson shook their hands, a rare smile on his face. "Congratulations," he said. You both fought bravely for this. Mrs. Wallace, or I suppose I should say Miss Weston now, you should leave Santa Fe as soon as possible. Wallace will be furious, and while he cannot legally pursue you, he may try other methods. We will leave today, Tobias promised. And thank you, Mr. Robertson, for believing her, for fighting for her. It was my honor, Robertson said. I wish you both every happiness. They collected their few belongings and left Santa Fe within hours, riding south toward Albuquerque and then west toward California. But this time, they were not running. They were simply traveling, two people in love heading toward a new life. They reached Los Angeles 3 months later in the spring of 1879. The city was growing rapidly, full of opportunity for those willing to work hard. Tobias found work at a ranch outside the city, his skills with horses and cattle in high demand. Theresa, free for the first time in years, began to discover who she was beyond the fear and the pain. She found work as a seamstress, her skilled hands creating beautiful dresses for the city's growing population of wealthy women. She made friends, cautiously at first, and then more freely as she learned to trust again. And every evening she came home to Tobias, to the small house they rented on the edge of town, to the life they were building together. They were married in June, a simple ceremony with just a few friends present. Theresa wore a dress she had made herself, pale yellow like sunshine, and when Tobias saw her walking toward him, he felt his heart might burst from happiness. This woman who had survived so much, who had fought so hard for her freedom, had chosen him, had chosen them. "I love you," he said as they stood before the minister, unable to wait for the official moment to speak his truth. "I loved you from the moment I found you, and I will love you until the day I die." "I love you too," Theresa said, tears of joy streaming down her face. "You saved me, not just from Richard but from giving up on myself. You showed me that love can be gentle, that it can heal instead of harm. You are my miracle, Tobias Randall." The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and when Tobias kissed his bride, the small gathering erupted in applause. But he was aware only of Theresa, of the way she kissed him back with no fear, no hesitation, only love and joy and hope for their future. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Theresa still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched at raised voices. But Tobias was patient, and gradually those moments became less frequent. She was learning to live without fear, to believe that she was truly safe. They built a good life in Los Angeles. Tobias was promoted to foreman at the ranch, and Theresa's dressmaking business grew until she had more work than she could handle. They saved their money, planning for the future, talking about the dreams they wanted to pursue. 2 years after their wedding, Theresa told Tobias she was pregnant. He had never seen such joy and terror mixed in someone's eyes. "What if I cannot be a good mother?" she asked. "What if I am too damaged, too broken?" "You are not broken," Tobias said firmly, a conversation they had had many times before but which she sometimes still needed to hear. "You are strong and brave, and you will be an amazing mother, and I will be right beside you every step of the way." Their son was born in the spring of 1882, a healthy baby boy with his mother's dark eyes and his father's stubborn chin. They named him Thomas, after Tobias's father, and Tobias had never known love like what he felt holding his son for the first time, seeing Theresa's exhausted but radiant smile as she watched them. Theresa was a natural mother, patient and loving, determined that her son would grow up knowing only kindness and safety. She sang to him, played with him, and as he grew, taught him to read and to see the beauty in the world. Tobias taught him to ride, to work with his hands, to treat everyone with respect regardless of their station in life. When Thomas was 3, they welcomed a daughter, Emily. She was tiny and fierce, already showing signs of the determination that ran in her mother's blood. Theresa would hold her and cry sometimes, tears of gratitude that she had lived long enough to have this, to be a mother, to raise children who would never know the fear she had endured. The years passed in a blur of happiness. They saved enough money to buy their own small ranch, 20 acres with good grazing land and a creek running through it. Tobias bred horses, developing a reputation for quality and honest dealing. Theresa continued her dressmaking, but now only for special clients, preferring to spend her time with her family. They heard news occasionally from New Mexico. Richard Wallace had died in 1885, shot in his own saloon during a dispute over a card game. Tobias saw the tension drain from Theresa's shoulders when she heard. A weight she had carried for years finally lifted. She went to the small church they attended and lit a candle, not for Wallace, but for the woman she had been, the scared girl who had thought she would never escape. As their children grew, Tobias and Theresa told them the story of how they met, modified slightly for young ears but honest about the courage it took for their mother to run, for their father to help. They wanted their children to understand that love was not always easy, that sometimes it required bravery, that it should never hurt. Thomas grew into a fine young man, thoughtful and hardworking, with his father's sense of honor and his mother's compassion. Emily was quick-witted and determined, refusing to be limited by what people said girls could and could not do. She learned to ride as well as any cowboy and announced at age 12 that she was going to be a veterinarian, even though no one was quite sure how a girl could accomplish that. In 1895, on their 16th wedding anniversary, Tobias and Theresa sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the California sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their children were inside, Thomas helping Emily with her studies, the sound of their laughter drifting out through the open windows. "Did you ever imagine this?" Theresa asked, her head resting on Tobias's shoulder. "When you found me in that canyon, did you imagine we would end up here?" "I imagined keeping you safe," Tobias said. "Everything else, the love, the marriage, the children, this life, that was beyond even my wildest dreams." "I was so broken," Theresa said softly. "I thought I would never be whole again, but you helped me heal. You gave me the time and space to put myself back together." "You did the healing yourself," Tobias corrected gently. "You chose to keep going, to fight for your freedom, to risk everything for the chance to really live. I just had the privilege of being there to witness it." Theresa lifted her head and kissed him, a kiss full of 16 years of love and trust and partnership. "I am so grateful I was hiding in that canyon on that particular day," she said. "That you were the one who found me. You did not just save my life, Tobias. You gave me a life worth living." "And you gave me purpose," Tobias said. "You gave me a family, a home, a love I did not even know I was looking for. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Theresa Randall." They sat together as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Two people who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances and built something beautiful from the ashes. Inside, their children continued to laugh and talk, growing up in a home filled with love and security, never knowing the fear their mother had once endured. Years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. The ranch prospered, becoming known throughout California for the quality of its horses. Thomas married a teacher from Los Angeles, a sweet girl named Claire who fit seamlessly into their family. They gave Tobias and Theresa their first grandchild, a boy they named Tobias Jr., in 1898. Emily, true to her word, found a way to pursue veterinary medicine, apprenticing with a kind doctor in San Francisco who was willing to teach a determined young woman. She eventually opened her own practice, one of the first female veterinarians in California, and made her parents proud with her skill and dedication. Through it all, Tobias and Theresa remained each other's constant. They had their disagreements, as any married couple did, but they had learned from their past experiences. They talked through problems, listened to each other, and never let anger or frustration turn to cruelty. Their love deepened with each passing year, becoming something solid and enduring, a foundation that could weather any storm. In 1902, they celebrated their 23rd wedding anniversary with a family gathering that included their children, their spouses, and their growing number of grandchildren. As Tobias looked around the table at the faces of the people they had created this life with, he felt overwhelming gratitude for that hot day in 1878 when he had ridden into a canyon and found a terrified woman hiding from the sun. That night, as they prepared for bed, Theresa paused in front of the mirror, looking at her reflection. She was 45 now, her dark hair showing threads of silver, lines around her eyes from years of smiling. "I am getting old," she said with a touch of humor. Tobias came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and meeting her eyes in the mirror. "You are getting more beautiful every day," he said. "You know what I see when I look at you? I see the woman who was brave enough to run, brave enough to fight, brave enough to trust again. I see the mother who raised our children with love and wisdom. I see my wife, my partner, the love of my life, and I feel like the luckiest man who ever lived." Theresa turned in his arms, tears in her eyes. "How do you always know exactly what I need to hear?" "Because I love you," Tobias said simply. "And I have spent more than 20 years learning how to love you well." They grew old together, their love story becoming something of a legend in their community. People spoke with respect of Theresa Randall, who had survived abuse and built a successful business, who had raised children who contributed positively to their community. They spoke of Tobias Randall, who had given up everything to help a stranger and found his life's purpose in the process. In 1910, as they celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary, they sat together on the same porch where they had spent so many evenings, still able to find new things to talk about, still holding hands like young lovers. Their children had children who were starting to have children of their own, the family tree spreading wide and strong. "You have any regrets?" Theresa asked Tobias one warm evening as they watched the sun set once again. Tobias thought about the question seriously. He thought about the job he had lost, the cattle he never found, the years he had spent working hard to build a life from nothing. He thought about the risks they had taken, the fear they had endured, the battle they had fought for Theresa's freedom. "Not a single one," he said finally. "Every choice I made led me here, to this porch, with you beside me, surrounded by the family we built together. If I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a thing. Not even finding a difficult, terrified woman who brought nothing but trouble into your life." Theresa teased, though there was real curiosity beneath the humor. "Especially not that," Tobias said, turning to look at her. "You brought me everything. You brought me love and purpose and a family and a life that matters. You were never trouble, Theresa. You were a gift." They kissed as the sun disappeared, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that lasted a lifetime. The scars of Theresa's past had faded, though they never disappeared completely, but they no longer defined her. She was Theresa Randall, successful businesswoman, beloved mother and grandmother, devoted wife and survivor. She was free. The years continued their march forward. Tobias and Theresa eventually passed the daily running of the ranch to Thomas, though they remained active and involved, offering advice and help as needed. They traveled some, taking a trip to Texas, so Tobias could introduce his wife to his sisters, who welcomed Theresa with open arms and swapped stories of strong women surviving difficult men. In 1918, they celebrated their 39th wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them, as the world outside dealt with the closing months of a terrible war. Thomas had enlisted despite their fears, but he had come home safely, and Emily had volunteered as a veterinarian, caring for the horses used in the war effort. Their family had been touched by the conflict but not destroyed by it, and again Tobias and Theresa felt grateful for the life they had built. They were sitting on their porch, a ritual that had defined their marriage, when Theresa said thoughtfully, "I have been thinking about writing it all down. Our story, I mean, for the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren, so they know where they came from, what we survived, what we built." "That is a fine idea," Tobias said, "though I do not know how interesting people will find the story of an old cowboy who found a woman in a canyon." "It is not the story of an old cowboy," Theresa said. "It is the story of how love can heal, how courage can change lives, how two broken people can help each other become whole. It is a story worth telling." So Theresa wrote, filling pages with her memories of fear and flight, of being found and learning to trust, of falling in love and fighting for freedom. She wrote about building a life from nothing, about raising children, about growing old with the man who had saved her, and whom she had saved in turn. When she finished, she had a leather-bound book full of their story, a testament to survival and love and the power of choosing hope even in the darkest moments. Tobias and Theresa lived to see their 50th wedding anniversary in 1929, a milestone that seemed like a miracle to Theresa, who had once believed she would not survive to see her 25th birthday. They renewed their vows in a small ceremony attended by dozens of family members, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them products of the love story that had begun in a canyon 41 years earlier. "I love you," Tobias said as they stood before the same minister who had married them so many years ago, now elderly himself. "I have loved you for 50 years, through joy and sorrow, through easy times and hard. You are my heart, Theresa, you always have been." "I love you," Theresa said through tears. "You gave me my life back. You showed me what love should be. You have been my partner, my protector, my best friend. These 50 years have been the greatest gift I could have ever received." They kissed, and their family cheered, and later that night as they sat together on their porch one more time, Theresa said, "I was afraid of being seen that day. I thought if anyone saw me, if anyone found me, it would mean my death. But you saw me, and instead of death, you brought me life. You saw me, truly saw me, and loved me anyway. That was the greatest gift you ever gave me." "No," Tobias said softly. "The greatest gift was that you let yourself be seen. You let me in, you learned to trust again, you chose to live instead of just survive. That took more courage than anything I ever did." They grew old together, their love story becoming a foundation for the family that spread out across California and beyond. Theresa passed away peacefully in 1932, at the age of 75, with Tobias holding her hand and their children gathered around her bed. Her last words were, "I love you," directed at the man who had found her in a canyon and given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. Tobias followed her 2 years later, at the age of 82, his heart simply giving out one morning as he sat on the porch they had shared for so many years. His children found him there, peaceful in death, and they chose to believe he had gone to find Theresa again, to continue their love story in whatever came next. The ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to what Tobias and Theresa had built together. The book Theresa wrote was passed down through the family, each generation reading the story of the frightened woman in the canyon and the cowboy who saved her, understanding that they carried that strength and that love in their own veins. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren grew up hearing the story of their remarkable ancestors. The woman who had been brave enough to run, and the man who had been brave enough to help. They learned about the fight for freedom, the power of love, and the importance of seeing and truly knowing the people you care about. Years became decades, and decades became centuries, but the story endured. It became a family legend, the foundation story that explained who they were and where they came from. It was a story about the Wild West, about a time when life was hard and justice was uncertain, but it was more than that. It was a story about human resilience, about the capacity for healing, about the transformative power of genuine love, because in the end, that was what Tobias and Theresa's story was really about. Not the abuse or the running or even the dramatic courtroom battle. Those were just the circumstances that brought them together. The real story was about two people who found each other when they needed each other most, who chose to build something beautiful from painful circumstances, who loved each other with dedication and care for more than 50 years. It was a story about a woman who was afraid of being seen, and the man who saw her anyway, who looked past the fear and the pain to the strength and the beauty beneath. It was a story about choosing to live, choosing to love, choosing to hope even when hope seemed impossible. And it was a story with a happy ending, the kind that does not happen in fairy tales but in real life, the kind that is earned through courage and dedication, and the daily choice to love well. The kind of ending that includes grandchildren playing on a porch, the smell of dinner cooking, the feeling of your beloved's hand in yours as the sun sets on another day of a life well lived. That was the legacy of Tobias and Theresa Randall, the cowboy and the woman who had been afraid of being seen. They proved that even in the hardest of times, even when circumstances seem impossible, love can flourish. Real, lasting, transformative love that heals wounds and builds futures and creates legacies that span generations. Their love story began in fear and desperation in a canyon in New Mexico territory in 1878, but it grew into something magnificent. It became a marriage that lasted 53 years, a family that spread across the country, a legacy of strength and compassion that influenced hundreds of lives. It became proof that sometimes the greatest love stories start in the darkest places, and that the choice to help a stranger can change not just their life, but yours as well. In the end, Tobias and Theresa Randall got there happily ever after. Not because everything was easy, not because they never faced challenges, but because they faced those challenges together. Because they chose each other every single day. Because they built a love that was strong enough to heal old wounds and weather new storms. Because they saw each other truly and deeply and loved what they saw. And that, as their descendants would say for generations to come, was the best love story of all.